I don't like this, though. Kim Kardashian has been on a campaign to free the worst people in the world from prison, or at least to free them from the full consequences of their crimes, especially if the consequence is the death penalty, because that is a consequence in at least still some states in the union. And if you live in one of those states, you know that, or you ought to know that. You know, before you choose to commit a brutal crime, you know what you're getting yourself into. You know what the consequence is. You commit the crime, and now you have to pay the price for it. It's really something that you chose. See, that's the thing about the death penalty, is that the individual who chooses to commit, if they didn't choose to commit the crime, I mean, if it's decided this person's completely insane, doesn't have free will, then we already, that already is the policy that those people are not going to be executed. So if they choose to commit it, they also chose the consequence. They chose the punishment because they knew what it was going to be. Kim Kardashian doesn't like that, though, and so this has been her hobby horse for a while now. And look, she has not done anything important or useful or good in her life, and she's decided to make this her thing. This is like her charitable endeavor, defending the worst scum on planet Earth. But what we have to remember is that, of course, this is all about her. So here she is in an interview recently talking about how the recent execution of a criminal impacted her personally. Because again, it's all about her. Listen.
I was working on the Brandon Bernard case, and he was in fact executed. And I remember crying and feeling so helpless because it was his last phone call, and he was telling me, like, don't cry, it's going to be okay. And, you know, hearing that he was worried that he would be claustrophobic in the chair. And then on his last call, when he was in the execution room, said, please tell Kim I'm not claustrophobic, it's okay. And like moments like that, I'm like, if only someone could see my day. I'm like hysterically crying, calling every governor that I could possibly imagine to try to stop someone's execution. And then I have to run into, you know, a Skims fitting, and I'm fitting and I'm crying and I can't really get my work done.
Oh, it was tough because she had to go to a Skims fitting. The other guy was being executed, but she was crying at her Skims fitting. I mean, the level of narcissism required to make somebody else's execution about you is, it's off the charts. And now she's back at it. So she tweeted this week. This is what she tweeted. I recently just read about the case of Melissa Lucio and wanted to share her story with you. So remember, she just read about the case. Just read about it. And already she's decided. She has passed her own verdict. She says she's been on death row for over 14 years for her daughter's death that was a tragic accident. Just found out about it, you know, probably read the Wikipedia article or something, and has already decided that Melissa Lucio, who was convicted of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, actually was a tragic accident. Kardashian goes on to say that Lucio's 2-year-old daughter died from falling down the steps. That's the claim anyway. Actually, died 2 days after falling down the steps, allegedly. But nobody ever sought medical attention for her. It was all a terrible misunderstanding on an accident. Kim Kardashian actually deleted this tweet, sort of confusingly deleted it, but is still openly advocating for Lucio and defending her. Hasn't really explained why she deleted tweets. Here are the facts, though. And Kardashian is not the only person coming to Melissa Lucio's defense and saying that she's really the victim here, and it would be a terrible injustice to execute her. So here's what happened. I'll break it down. Quick summary. Her 2-year-old child was found dead in her home 2 days after this supposed fall. Now, already this raises some questions, like, your child fell down the steps and was, it turns out, fatally wounded, and you never sought medical attention for her. That raises some serious questions. Then you get some answers to those questions when you find out that there was bruising all over her body, clumps of hair pulled out of her head, and bite marks on her body as well, and a broken arm. The physician at the hospital said it was the worst case of abuse he'd ever seen in his life. The pathologist looked at the autopsy, said the autopsy showed that she died from abuse. She did not die from, a fall down the steps. Also keep in mind that she fell down the steps, quote unquote, that's like the classic abuser rationalization. That's the excuse that, I don't know, every abuser in history has given, or at least 90% of them that fell down the steps. How often have we heard that one? And falling down the steps, how does that result in bite marks? How does that result in your hair falling out? And once again, even if somehow, in some unbelievable coincidence, the child happened to fall down the steps in such a way as to cause all of these injuries, I don't know how that could even possibly be the case. But then she would have been very visibly and grievously injured. So why didn't you seek medical attention? There's no explanation for this. And then you find out that Lucio actually confessed under interrogation that she's responsible for the death of her child. Now, yes, this interrogation, this confession, is being used by Lucio's defenders to say that the whole thing was invalid because she confessed under, it was like she was being interrogated for several hours, like 5-6 hours, and she denied it many times before she finally admitted it. And so her defenders are saying, well, it was 5 hours of interrogation, and then she confessed. Well, that's what an interrogation is. That's why you call it an interrogation. How do you think an interrogation is supposed to work? Are the cops supposed to just you've got a dead child here with all of these wounds on her body, and you bring in the mother and you sit her down and you say, did you kill your child? And she says no, and then you just say, oh, okay, well, never mind then. No, obviously they had, especially when the physician at the hospital tells you that this is the worst case of physical abuse of a child he's ever seen in his life. And then given all the other circumstances, that's going to make you, as a police officer, as an investigator, very, very suspicious about this woman. And so, of course, you're going to interrogate her for 5 hours. Interrogate her for 15 hours until you get an explanation that makes sense. I don't even understand this whole thing about, this is so common that we hear as well, the person only confessed after X number of hours of interrogation. That's the point of the interrogation. Are you suggesting that the cops should just take the first answer they get? She killed her child, and obviously she didn't want to admit to it right away. She would prefer not to admit to it. She doesn't want to go and be in jail for the rest of her life or get executed. So part of the interrogation is breaking through those initial psychological defenses to try to get to the truth. That's the point. So to me, this is very clear cut. But Kim Kardashian, spent 5-6 seconds reading about the issue and decided that Melissa Lucio is really the victim here. A woman convicted of brutally beating her 2-year-old to death is the person we're supposed to feel sorry for. Sorry, that's just I don't have that in me. And it's not because I'm callous. I think the callousness is all on the other side. This is misdirected sympathy. This is this kind of twisted form of compassion that you get from the left. You get from people like Kim Kardashian, and it's among other things, it's an easy kind of compassion because she doesn't feel like, if you're a morally decent person, you should feel this intense, unbridled revulsion and anger at this kind of violence against a child. I mean, you should have a rage boiling inside you at the idea that a child was beaten to death. And that's what a morally healthy person experiences. That's the hatred we talked about a couple days ago. If you're a loving and compassionate person, you should have hatred in your heart for things like this. the brutal victimization of a child. You should hate that. You should hate that with every fiber of your being. Now, by all appearances, Kim Kardashian doesn't have that in her. She doesn't really feel much about the fact that, about the victims and the terrible things that were done to them. And so it's easy for her to have, quote, compassion for the criminals, because she doesn't feel any anger about what they did. She doesn't feel any righteous, justified anger. That's where the compassion comes from. You know what it comes from? It comes from indifference. It's not compassion, it's indifference. And we tend to confuse those two things a lot in this culture. There are a whole lot of people who are very indifferent to injustice, and they get away with positioning that indifference as compassion. Hey, listen, hit the subscribe button. Do it right now. I demand it. And I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.